I opened the back door, and as I did it, he jumped out from behind the wall in the kitchen, all dressed in black.
Stourbridge is a historic market town in the West Midlands, England. The town's history dates back to medieval times, with its name derived from the Old English star, meaning strong, and bridge, referring to a bridge over the River Stour. By the 13th century, Stourbridge had established itself as a market town, benefiting from its strategic location near the river, which facilitated trade and commerce. Stourbridge's transformation into industrial hub began in the 17th century, when it became renowned for its glass-making industry. The availability of local resources, such as fire clay and coal, attracted skilled glassmakers from France, who brought with them advanced techniques. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Stourbridge continued to expand, with improvements in infrastructure, including the introduction of the Stourbridge Canal, which enhanced transportation and trade. Today, Stourbridge retains much of its historic charm, with a blend of old and new architecture. The town centre features a mix of independent shops, cafes and markets, while the surrounding areas offer scenic beauty and green spaces, such as Mary Stevens Park. Norton Road is a very desirable place to live in the town, just a stone's throw from the park. It's made up of larger homes, with well-manicured front gardens and private driveways. It was just after 8 a.m. on the 30th of March 2017 when a woman living on Norton Road was startled by a loud crash that shattered the stillness. Her heart raced as she rushed to the window, her mind scrambling to make sense of the sudden commotion. She pulled back the curtain and was met by the sight of a Land Rover, its front end crumpled against the stone wall outside of her home. The impact had sent debris scattering across the pavement and road, indicating that it had been driving at a high speed. As she stood there trying to process what had happened, the wail of sirens grew louder, echoing through the neighbourhood. The flashing lights of police cars illuminated the street within seconds. Her attention was then drawn back to the Land Rover, as its door creaked open and a man stumbled out. He appeared dazed and disoriented, his movements slow as he was trying to regain his balance and bearings. He appeared to be relatively young, somewhere in his early 20s, with brown hair and a baby face. Within seconds, the man was surrounded by police. Greyhound Lane is a residential neighbourhood in Stourbridge, less than half a mile away from Norton Road. It consists of mostly large detached homes, with trees dotted up and down the road. The Wilkinson family had lived in their large Gothic-style home, called Rathmore Lodge, for the past 10 years. They had turned it into a family home with a major refurbishment. Tracey and Peter Wilkinson had 2 children together, 13-year-old Pierce and 18-year-old Lydia. Pierce was a student at Red Hill Schools in Stourbridge, while Lydia was in her first year at Bristol University. Pierce had excelled in school and was described as a thoughtful young man. He was passionate about his football team, West Bromwich Albion, and was devoted to his greyhound dog, Mandy. The Wilkinson family was the epitome of a close-knit and loving household. Peter worked as the managing director of Acid International, which was part of Hill and Smith Holdings. The company manufactures safety barriers, and Peter had worked there since 2003. It was a role that kept him busy, but also provided a comfortable life for the family. Tracey was a stay-at-home mother, keeping the house in order and meals on the table. she had other things to keep her occupied as well. She was a very compassionate woman and had worked in a rehab centre supporting people with drug and alcohol problems. She had even been a ballroom dancing champion, but now all of her time was devoted to her family. Her husband, Peter, described her as a very stylish and elegant woman. One of the Wilkinson family's favourite activities was walking their beloved greyhound, Mandy. These walks were more than just a daily chore. They were an opportunity for the Wilkinsons to connect, enjoy nature and share their thoughts. The sight of the family strolling through their neighbourhood, with Mandy trotting happily beside them, was a familiar one. Mandy had come from Hall Green Retired Greyhound Trust, and she was a retired racer. The chairman of the rescue, Tracey Parbury, said of the family, "Peter, Tracey and the children were great advocates for the trust and showed what wonderful pets greyhounds are. Their weekends often included visits to the local pub, the New Inn, where they would have a meal, or Tracey and Peter would have a few drinks before walking home. Peter and Pierce also had a special tradition of playing pool at another local pub, the Greyhound Pub." One local recollected, "They were well known and liked by everyone. No one had a bad word to say about them. They were a very charitable couple. They were good Samaritans, and Tracey had a heart of gold. It was just in their nature. They were just so kind." The family were known to be friendly and welcoming, bringing in the bins and parcels for their neighbours, and always saying hello with a smile on their faces. One neighbour recalled, "Tracey was a very glamorous and well-dressed woman. She was tall, dark and thin, and used to dance, not professionally but to a high level. She was very striking but always very friendly. She used to have a coffee and a glass of wine with one of my neighbours, who knew her better. They came to a party at our house years ago, so they were sociable." It had been a quiet morning in Starbridge on the 30th of March 2017. As usual, there wasn't a lot of activity at the police station. But just after 8 a.m, a 999 call came in. It was from Peter Wilkinson. He said that he had just returned home from walking their dog Mandy when he was attacked. There was a man in a balaclava in his home, and he had stabbed him several times. His breath was becoming fainter and fainter, he said. The scene at the family's home was chaotic as police and paramedics arrived in moments. The first sign that something was amiss was noticed almost immediately. It was Peter, collapsed in the garden with blood pooling through his shirt. The paramedics rushed over to him and found that he had sustained stab wounds to his chest and back. As he was rushed to hospital, police entered the home to perform a sweep. Paramedics followed close behind. The home was eerily silent, other than the frantic shouts from the first responders as they found Tracey in the master bedroom. She was in her bed. Her pillow, duvet and sheet was saturated in blood, and she was completely lifeless. It quickly became apparent that she was far beyond life-saving measures. She had sustained 17 stab wounds, some penetrating to a depth of 10 to 15 centimetres. There were muddy footprints on the bed, indicating that the killer had stood above Tracey on the bed and stabbed her through her duvet. Close to her body lay a blood-stained knife. As the medical examiner was called, police and paramedics continued through the rest of the home. There was blood leading into Pierce's bedroom. Police entered, and they found Pierce on the floor. He was crawling towards them, covered in blood and struggling to breathe. Seconds later, Pierce collapsed and went into cardiac arrest. He had been stabbed a total of 8 times. His breath was shallow and laboured. The paramedics quickly sprung into action, performing chest compressions and trying to stabilise Pierce. After a couple of minutes, He was carefully lifted onto a stretcher and placed into the ambulance. With sirens blazing, they raced towards Birmingham Children's Hospital. All the while, paramedics continued CPR in the back of the ambulance. When Pierce arrived at the hospital, doctors could assess the situation. He had been stabbed with such force that one of his lungs had collapsed, and his spinal cord had almost been completely severed. Tragically, not too long after Pierce arrived at the hospital, he died from the injuries despite the best efforts of the ambulance staff and hospital medics. As Pierce was pronounced dead, his father, Peter, was fighting for his life over in Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham. He was operated on for 2 incised wounds in the abdomen and 2 in the bowel. Before he awoke to find that his son and wife were dead, the hunt was already on for the killer. As detectives were assessing the scene of chaos at the family home, they discovered that the family car was missing. Peter had told them that he was stabbed as he entered the home, and the man in the balaclava had then stolen the car. Police immediately set out in search of it. They radioed the information to their colleagues, asking them to be on the lookout for a Land Rover. Suddenly, a patrol car reported the car was spotted nearby. A chase began, with police cars weaving through the residential neighbourhoods with their sirens blazing. The man driving the stolen vehicle sped recklessly through the suburban neighbourhoods, even ramming 2 police cars at one point in a desperate bid to escape. He swerved onto the opposite side of the road, forcing cars onto the pavement to avoid a head-on collision. He then mounted the pavement in a desperate bid to lose the police, speeding past the several vehicles that he had forced off the road. The suspect then rounded the corner onto Norton Road, where he lost control. The Land Rover skidded wildly, with its tyres screeching against the asphalt before crashing violently into a wall outside a home on Norton Road. Once the car crashed to a halt, the front driver's seat door slowly opened, and a man stepped out. His clothing was stained with blood, and he looked dishevelled. Police quickly surrounded him and took him into custody. When they searched the Land Rover, they found a blood-soaked knife in the footwell. As news of the double murder spread throughout the area, tributes for Tracey and Pierce came in, as people wished for Peter to make a full recovery. The outside of the family's home turned into a makeshift memorial, as people left down flowers and cards of condolences. One poignantly read, "So many memories that we will always treasure," while another read, "Gone but not forgotten." There were many cards left by Pierce's friends, showing the impact he had on his peers. One of them read, "Rest in peace, Pierce. You will never be forgotten. We had so many good memories, and I hope you're safe up there. Fly high, bro. Rest in peace, Pierce and Tracey. Love, Cookie/Jamie." One of the family's neighbours, Maggie Paynes, commented in the media, "They seem like a very happy family. It's just devastating." Red Hill School sent out a statement to parents and pupils, informing them of the tragedy. They announced that those who may need support would have access to psychological first aid, provided by Diddley Educational Psychology Services. The school also said they would be providing parents with guidance on how to support their children. Sometime later, the school paid tribute to Pierce on their website. They referred to him as a loyal, caring, and conscientious pupil who would be missed by everybody in the entire school. It read in part, "He was a loving son and brother. Our thoughts and prayers remain with his family, in particular his father Peter and his sister Lydia." One of his teachers then paid tribute on the news.
Pierce was a loyal, caring and conscientious pupil, and he'll be sadly missed by every member of our school community. He always met everyone with a smile and was a kind and thoughtful young man. He was passionate about his football team, West Bromwich Albion, and devoted to his pet greyhound dog. He was a loving son and brother, and our thoughts and prayers are with his family and friends at this time, especially his father Peter and his sister Lydia. Pupils are in school today, and we have people here who can offer professional help and support. We would also just like to thank everyone who's contacted the school and offered their support and their condolences.
The investigation got underway immediately, and detectives already had a suspect in custody. Superintendent Lee Kendrick announced, "Clearly our investigation is at a very early stage, but we understand the suspect was known to the family and may have been living at the address, although he is not a family relative. We don't think this was a burglary or a robbery." The man who'd been arrested after stealing the family's Land Rover was identified as 24-year-old Aaron Barley, and he was indeed known to the family. Aaron Barley's life was a blend of chaos and instability, a story marred by tragedy and misfortune from the very beginning. Born the child of incest, his parents were uncle and niece, a shadow that would forever loom over his existence. By the age of 6, Barley was already an orphan. At 4, his father had died of cancer, leaving a void that his mother struggled to fill. 2 years later, the fragile semblance of family shattered entirely when his mother died of a heart attack. In the span of just 2 years, Barley lost both of his parents and was cast adrift in a world that seemed to have little room for him. His formative years were a blur of instability, spent moving from one foster home to another, shuffled between distant relatives and temporary carers. Each new place offered a fleeting promise of stability that never materialised. The walls of these homes were often filled with other children, each with their own traumas, creating an environment where Barley's emotional needs were frequently overlooked. The foster system, although a lifeline, was also a battleground, a place where survival often meant hardening one's heart and trusting no one. His childhood was devoid of the constancy that many take for granted. The absence of a stable family unit left Barley craving connection, but also wary of it. Eileen Adams, his former teacher and foster carer from 2003 to 2007, described him as a Jekyll and Hyde character who could be caring and sensitive, but also threatening. Over time, Barley became more difficult and displayed signs of an increasingly violent personality. The fragmented nature of his upbringing cultivated a sense of rootlessness and a deep-seated mistrust of the world around him. He was sent to Uplands Children's Home in Worcester in 2005, where his violence only increased. Staff could only calm him down by restraining him. His violence resulted in him being kicked out of the children's home just 6 months later. According to a former resident of the home, he was a deeply troubled individual. He repeatedly got into fights with staff and other children, and even stole a staff member's car after breaking into the office and stealing her keys. A former friend said of him, "Aaron looked innocent. He looked 11 and looked like butter wouldn't melt. But he wasn't innocent. He was deeply troubled." This friend further said, "Apart from the anger, he wasn't an emotional person. We never saw him crying. He didn't like being touched. It's as though he didn't feel anything. He was the type of kid who, if he saw something upsetting happen to someone, he wouldn't get upset or cry. He would just stand and watch. It was like he was in his body, but detached from it." By the time he was 13, he was already on the police's radar after he and a handful of other boys went missing in Bromsgrove. Over the next handful of years, Barley moved around a lot, sleeping on couches or on the street. He lived in Birmingham for a while, where he had a baby with a girlfriend, But this new responsibility wasn't a stabilising force in his life. He often found himself in and out of trouble with police, amassing 21 convictions for various offences, including an assault on a former partner. In the spring of 2016, Tracey Wilkinson had just brought groceries at Tesco supermarket in Starbridge. As she came outside with her trolley filled with food for her family, she saw a homeless man outside. He was trying to keep warm inside a cardboard box. He looked young, and Tracey immediately felt a wave of pity and a desire to help him. It was Aaron Barley. He had been sleeping rough after living in shared accommodations. Tracey struck up a conversation with Barley. He told her that he was down on his luck and just needed a chance to get back on his feet. Tracey felt bad and asked Barley to follow her to her parked car. She then drove him over to Dudley Council to get him some help. She was able to secure him a spot in a local hostel, but she stayed in contact with him after she paid for his mobile phone contract. While he now had a roof over his head, he had no money, so Tracey made sure to provide him with breakfast and dinner each day. Sometimes, that was in her own home, but her husband Peter didn't mind. In fact, Peter was on board with the idea of helping Barley back on his feet. His firm, Asset International, created Project Shelter to help the young man. By the summer, Peter had even arranged a permanent job for him at Newport Docks, a business which he ran. Barley did general labouring, working in the busy yard, washing, cleaning, loading and unloading crash barriers. Tracey and Peter truly believed that Barley was improving. He was attending an alcohol and drugs rehabilitation centre to combat his struggles, had a steady job, and Tracey had even secured him with a flat. A close friend of Tracey recollected. They not only helped a homeless person with cash, they found him a roof over his head, a job, and even fed him. But trouble was just around the corner. The Wilkinson family had been unaware of the dark things that Barley had been saying to the volunteers at the rehabilitation centre. He had told them that he wanted to kill somebody with a knife, and that his two aims in life were to kill a policeman and a prison officer. He said that he dreamed of spending his life in prison as a notorious criminal. Despite his disturbing comments, the volunteers dismissed them as bravado, caused by drug abuse. Around the same time, managers at Newport Docks informed Peter that Barley wasn't showing up for work. He was eventually evicted from his flat and was fired after he was aggressive towards his manager. The Wilkinson family took a step back, but one afternoon Peter found Barley asleep in the corner of their driveway. He had obviously been in a fight. Peter got him inside and made him some tea. He was covered in bruises, and when Tracey saw the state that he was in, she wanted to help him again. The family managed to get council accommodation sorted, and they allowed him to do some general jobs for them to earn some cash. Peter's father, John, recalled. She felt sorry for him and became friends with him. He even sat around the table with us all at Christmas and shared a meal with us. The family had welcomed Barley into their home for Christmas Day. He wrote Tracey a card which read, "To the mother that I never had." By February, Barley had managed to secure a new job working as a furniture polisher and got himself a new flat. The family stayed in contact, and Barley came to their home for dinner twice a week. In early March, Peter shared a takeaway and a couple of beers with him before he dropped him back at the flat. It was the last time that he saw him until he attacked him and stabbed him in the very home the family had welcomed him into. While Barley appeared to be more stable, it was only short-lived. His behaviour became more erratic, and Peter eventually cancelled the mobile phone contract. Barley was then fired again after he started abusing drugs and refusing to show up for his shifts. That same month, he made threats on Facebook about taking down his family and wondering about how many people he could kill before he was caught. After 2 weeks, Peter was discharged from the hospital. He and his daughter Lydia now had to grapple with the grief that engulfed them. They couldn't return home as it was now a crime scene, so they went to stay with Peter's father John and his wife Wendy. Peter recounted the harrowing events of the morning to detectives. It had started out like any regular day for the Wilkinson family. Peter was at home with Tracey and Pierce, while Lydia was away at university. At around 7:30 a.m, Peter left the family home to walk Mandy, as he did every morning. The house was still and quiet, with Tracey and Pierce asleep upstairs in their respective bedrooms. Peter moved silently, careful not to disturb their slumber. He exited through the back kitchen door, leaving it unlocked. They lived in a safe neighbourhood, and Peter felt no qualms about leaving the door unsecured for his family, who would be awake soon. Unbeknownst to Peter, however, a sinister presence lurked nearby. Aaron Barley had been hiding in the garden and driveway of their home since the early morning hours. The family security system had captured his movements, but they hadn't checked the footage that morning. They had no idea he was there, lurking in the shadows. Barley had concealed himself behind the cars in the driveway. He had removed his light-coloured jacket to blend into the early morning gloom. His shoes were covered with black socks, and a balaclava masked his face. He was there with purpose, but Peter, Tracey and Pierce were blissfully unaware. Every detail of Barley's attire was meticulously planned to avoid detection. The calm of the morning bellied the storm about to break. At about 4 a.m, Barley had been observed entering the garden shed, where he remained for around 35 minutes. When he was captured on surveillance leaving the shed, he was armed with a claw hammer. He left it on the patio and then crawled back and forth over the lawn. Barley then hid among the bushes until Peter left with the family dog in tow at about 7:30 a.m. The security cameras at the family's home captured Barley entering the back door, where he lifted a butcher knife from the kitchen. He proceeded up the stairs and stabbed Pierce and Tracey to death. Peter was caught off guard when he returned home from his walk just before 8 a.m. that morning. As he drew closer to the back door, he couldn't see Tracey or Pierce in their usual spot, making breakfast.
I came back and I can remember looking through the window of the back door of the house, thinking that everybody must have overslept because nobody was up. I opened the back door, and as I did it, he jumped out from behind the wall in the kitchen, all dressed in black, and with a big knife held over his head, and started stabbing me with it.
Before Peter even had a moment to respond, Barley stabbed and slashed at him with the second knife and shouted out, "Die, you bastard."
After that, I remember some grappling and being stabbed a number of times. I then just recall thinking that it was going to go on and on and on.
He stumbled out of the back door, and the security cameras caught him falling to the ground with Barley above him. He raised the knife above his head. Peter begged for his life and told Barley that they had helped him. He fully expected to be stabbed again, but Barley simply turned around and fled the family's home in their Land Rover Discovery. Peter had sustained 6 stab wounds, 2 to the face, 2 to the stomach, and 2 to the back. He recollected, "I got up I think I was on the lawn at this time and went into the kitchen and phoned the emergency services. I was not thinking I was too badly injured. Then I remembered looking around and seeing this huge trail of blood across the floor, which was my blood. I then went back out into the back garden, sat in a chair, and I remember talking to the person on the other end of the phone and realising that I was actually dying. I could feel my lungs filling with fluid, and I could feel the energy draining from me. Peter was completely unaware that his wife was dead inside, and his son was on the verge of death.
An ambulanceman treated me, and another one ran inside. I then remember, whilst I was being treated by, I think it was 2 or 3 people, an ambulanceman came out and said, behind me, 1 deceased, 1 in cardiac arrest. And my heart sunk.
At that moment, his whole world fell apart. The family's greyhound Mandy was uninjured in the attack, but left shaken by witnessing what had happened. She was taken in by other family members, although the rescue she had come from offered to take her while Peter and Lydia grieved. She commented, "Pierce and Peter particularly loved Mandy, and she really loved them too. But I think in time to come, Mandy will be some help to get the family through this tragedy." Aaron Barley appeared in Birmingham Magistrates Court in a hospital gown, with his right arm in a sling. He was charged with the murders of Tracey and Pierce and the attempted murder of Peter. The judge then remanded him into custody until the next hearing. By now, details of the murders and the relationship between the family had spread across the headlines. People were absolutely stunned. One local commented, "It doesn't surprise me at all that they would open up their home to somebody in need and provide them with a roof over their head. It was just their nature. They were just so kind." Colin Elcock, a local Conservative councillor, came to know the family after Tracey and Peter volunteered by leafleting ahead of the West Midlands mayoral election. He said to the media, "They were just a decent family all around. It's such a measure of the family that they would do such a thing for a stranger. To learn Peter is now lying in a hospital bed and his wife and son have been killed is shocking." On the 2nd of April, Lydia returned to the family's home for the first time, but only to lay down a bouquet of flowers. She provided a heartfelt statement which read, "Our family are devastated at the loss of Tracey and Pierce. They were extremely loved by all of their family and friends. Pierce was a fun-loving, friendly and happy boy who loved computer games and made everyone smile. Tracey was loving, caring and a wonderful mother and daughter, always putting others before herself." She went on to thank the emergency services and the hospital staff before requesting privacy for the family. The tributes continued to flood in, and on the 15th of April a minute's applause was held prior to the kick-off at West Brom's match against Liverpool at the Hawthorns. Tracey and Pierce were West Brom fans, and Peter was an East Stand season ticket holder. Albion Chief Executive Martin Goodman stated, "We know from the huge public reaction to the incident just how much these awful events have shocked everyone, and it is difficult for us to imagine what Peter, Lydia and their loved ones are going through." Peter had gotten out of the hospital just in time for the match, which he watched with his daughter, Lydia, and the rest of the family. The next day, he paid tribute to his wife and son. He said that they were both dearly missed and deeply loved. He said that his wife was his absolute angel, who did a lot of work to help other people. He recollected, "She wouldn't walk past a homeless person on the street without stopping to give them a sandwich. She was that type of person." As for Pierce, he said that his son loved school and that they had such a happy family life. But all of that had been taken away from them. Through tears, Peter told the Express and Star that he had almost died after suffering 6 deep stab wounds. He had been in intensive care for 6 days, and it was very much touch and go. Peter said that he and Lydia would remain in the Starbridge area, but that they would never be able to live in their old home. It had been his and Tracey's labour of love for around 6 or 7 years, as they renovated it and turned it into their dream family home. Peter then added, "We will find happiness again. It's just going to be a long, long road that we should never have to take." Aaron Barley returned to court on the 3rd of May, where he confirmed his name and then pleaded guilty to the attempted murder of Peter. Lydia was seated in the public gallery, about 10 feet away from Barley, but Peter wasn't there. Barley wasn't asked to enter a plea for the murder charges and was then remanded into court. The guilty plea was a relief for the family, but they knew they still had the traumatic ordeal of the murder trial unless Barley pleaded guilty to the murders as well. In the meantime, they were keeping themselves occupied by planning Tracey and Pierce's joint funeral. It was scheduled for the 7th of June, and Peter said that he wanted to have an uplifting event, before adding, "Pierce was taken so young, so it's not a celebration. They would have wanted people to be thinking of them, not necessarily mourning them. Black is not compulsory, just because we want the funeral to be uplifting and not a dark ceremony." On the 7th of June, hundreds of people showed up to St. Mary's Church, as Tracey and Pierce were escorted into the church in a single white coffin. The family's greyhound, Mandy, stood in a guard of honour. Lydia stood before the mourners and said that her mother and brother shared a true bond of love that could never be broken. She described her mother as the most perfect mother and friend, and Pierce as simply the best brother. Through tears, she said, "They were home birds who were perfectly happy watching films together. My mum was gorgeous, not only in looks and fashion, but she had a beautiful soul. Pierce, who I always affectionately referred to as Pippin, was simply the best brother I could ask for. He was so happy. I shared so many memories with him. He'll always be my baby brother, and I'll never forget the fantastic times we had together." Family friend Roy Whiffen, who was also Pierce's godfather, provided his own eulogy. He said that some people might be surprised to see just one coffin, but said that Tracey and Pierce were always together, inseparable, as they always were in life. The service was followed by a private committal. In the wake of the funerals, Lydia spoke with Birmingham Mail about the horrific ordeal.
At the age of 19, I will never get to see my mom or my little brother again. Is heartbreaking. It's indescribable pain.
She said that when she saw her father in hospital for the first time, she didn't expect him to make it. She said the idea of planning a triple funeral was traumatic, and she struggled to process her emotions.
I take a lot of strength in the fact that Dad is still with me, because for a few hours I thought I had nobody and that I was alone in the world. So for Dad to make such an immense recovery, I take a lot of strength from that.
There is no motive.
She poignantly recollected. "I knew there was nothing I could do to help my mum and Pierce, as they had tragically passed away. So my sole focus at that moment in time was my dad, because he was the only thing I had left in life. And if I didn't have him, then I was going to be completely on my own, and there was nothing I could do about it." When Peter finally awoke, Lydia couldn't bring herself to tell him that she had been tasked with identifying the bodies of her mother and brother, and didn't tell him until he was out of critical care. With the murder trial date looming, Peter and Lydia were nervous. Peter knew that he would have to relive the day his wife and son were killed, and he too was almost killed. But on the 3rd of October, Aaron Barley appeared in court and pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder. Wearing a light blue t-shirt and blue tracksuit bottoms, he appeared emotionless as he admitted the murders. During the court proceedings, prosecutor Karim Khalil read aloud some facts of the case. He said that Peter thought that it was important to his wife to help Barley, but said that Pierce and Lydia were never comfortable with him around. He further said that Peter wondered whether him cancelling Barley's phone contract was the catalyst for the murders. Barley's defence attorney, Jonas Hankin, told the court that his parents had died when he was a young boy, following which he was pushed from pillar to post. He said that his client was suffering from borderline personality disorder and felt that the Wilkinsons had abandoned him. However, the defence attorney conceded that the family had shown him extraordinary kindness. During the court proceeding, Lydia provided a statement. She told Barley that he had obliterated her life, telling him, "My parents helped you. You repaid them with destruction and heartache. You have obliterated my life, murdered half my family, very nearly all of it, and for this I will never forgive you." She said that if she had have been home that day, she didn't doubt that she too would have been killed. She told the courtroom that life had been heartbreakingly difficult since the murders, and said that she had been left a shell of her former self. She stated, "I was confident and enjoyed life, but now grief has taken over. Grief has ruined me. To see the stairs at home, to walk the last path they took, tears me up inside." Aaron Barley returned to court the next morning to be sentenced for the double murder. He was addressed by Judge Mrs. Carr, who told him that he had snuffed out the lives of a mother and son and had left a trail of shattered lives before him. She told him that he had devastated Peter and Lydia, and told the court that they were both in counselling. She said to Barley, "The family's understandable anger and distress has been obvious to all. Mr. Wilkinson says words cannot express the devastating and traumatic effect your actions have had on his family. They showed you love and respect, which you had not enjoyed before. He has been left with a void in his life that is permanent." She continued, stating, "You abused your knowledge of the family home, which you had only gained through the Wilkinsons' extraordinary kindness and generosity to you. Mrs. Wilkinson and Pierce, only 13, were in bed at home, where they were entitled to feel and should have been safe. You have shown no remorse. Indeed, only regret that Mr. Wilkinson survived his injuries, and at times, satisfaction in what you did achieve. You knew that you were destroying the family. It's what you intended." The judge then sentenced Aaron Barley to life in prison with a minimum sentence of 30 years. After he was handcuffed and escorted out of the courtroom to begin serving his sentence, Ian Crooks, senior Crown prosecutor, provided a statement. He said to the media, "Aaron Barley carried out a brutal and cruel attack on his victims, who had shown nothing other than the utmost kindness and consideration to him over a number of years. In return for their support and kindness, Barley waited for the opportunity to gain access to the family home before fatally stabbing Tracey and Pierce and then attacking Peter Wilkinson, stabbing him several times." While Peter had said that he was going to move from the family home, he eventually changed his mind. He said that it was their home, and after Barley had already taken so much from them, he couldn't let him take that as well. Peter said, "It was the most difficult thing I have ever done in my life." However, Peter later put the house up for sale, priced at £650,000. Lydia graduated from university in 2019. She spoke with the BBC afterwards, telling them, "My mum and dad always encouraged me to work hard and try your best, and the fact that my mum was really proud that I got into Bristol, and all my family was, has been a big drive for me. In terms of my mum and Pierce, we remember them and make sure that we remember not what happened, but who they were. We don't want to associate what happened with their memories, and that's a good way of looking at it." Following the trial, it was revealed that a week before the murders, Tracey had told a volunteer at Atlantic House Recovery Centre in Dudley that Barley had threatened her life. Despite this, the volunteer didn't inform police. This was just one of 4 instances of concerning behaviour that support workers didn't pass on. The others included his expressed desire to kill people, including a police officer and a prison officer. According to the recovery centre, it was their policy to report violent intent, threats, or an indication to commit a crime. But nobody did. In December of 2017, Barley's sentence was challenged at the Court of Appeal, and it was argued that his sentence was unduly lenient. His minimum term of 30 years was increased by an extra 4 years. Despite the guilty pleas, it still isn't understood why Aaron Barley committed the murders. Detective Superintendent Tom Chisholm referred to the murders as the most shocking he had ever encountered in his career. He stated, "There's usually a build-up or a motive or a grudge or something, but this one is just very random." After Barley had been arrested, he had been completely uncooperative. He had boasted that he killed 2 people, but wished that it had been 3, before saying, "I chopped them up. I don't need a solicitor." About 12 hours after the arrest, he pressed the buzzer in his cell. When a guard arrived, Barley said to him, "I've stabbed 3 people. I ain't bothered about taking one of you with me." When he was asked whether he wanted legal representation, his response was, "I don't need a solicitor. I've done it. What's more to say? I'll bite his face off if he tries to come near me." These were the only comments that Barley ever made in relation to the murders and attempted murder. He never explained what caused him to turn on the family who took him under their wing.
There is no motive. There's still no motive. The last time that I saw Aaron, I shared a curry with him and a couple of bottles of beer. I then dropped him off back at his flat.
He saw her as a mum, as a second mum, and he said that quite openly, and all my mum wanted to do was help him as much as she could.
He decided to come and take his misfortune out on the people who tried to give him a lift in life.
The grief is shared. It almost makes it that little bit easier to deal with, because you can't connect why it happened. All you know is that it has, and we can't do anything else but make them proud.
Well, besties, that is it for this episode of Morbidology. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I'd like to say a massive thank you to my newest supporters up on Patreon, Chelsea, Megan and Gina. You can join us up on Patreon for as little as $1 a month, and you can cancel your subscription at any point. Patreon really is a great way for independent shows to continue running, and I genuinely do appreciate all of you. Up on Patreon, I upload ad-free and early release episodes, bonus episodes of Morbidology Plus, behind the scenes, and I also send out a handwritten thank you card along with some cool exclusive merch. As mentioned before, Morbidology is now up on YouTube, and the episodes are presented in a documentary style, with photographs and videos associated with each episode. This includes the interrogation footage, body cam footage, and any other footage I may have been able to get. Remember to check us out at morbidology.com for more information about this episode and to read some true crime articles. Until next time, take care of yourselves, stay safe, and have an amazing week.